Good evening. We're in First Kings chapter 8, 2 Kings chapter 18. 2 Kings 18. That's study of Hezekiah tonight. Hezekiah. This seems to be an ongoing theme, but we've got a lot of sick folks. I know that you know somebody that is, and we've got several folks that are struggling with a lot of different kinds of illnesses. So make sure we check on them and do whatever we can for folks that are sick. A lot of colds and flu and COVID and that kind of thing, but a lot of other things going around as well. So remember all of them. Um, there were very few good kings. When the nation of Israel decided that they just had to be like the people around them and decided they wanted a king, uh, from that time forward to the carrying away of the southern kingdom in about 586 BC, there wasn't really that many good kings. As a matter of fact, the northern kingdom, I think we mentioned this a couple of times, but the northern kingdom didn't have one good king. Not one. They were all bad kings. They pulled the people away from God. They introduced worship of idols. They were evil in every way. And as a result of that, they were carried away first. They were destroyed first, about 721 BC. So the 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 thought that we could look at a king that would be considered to be a good king is a good thing for us. We already looked at Joash, who was a good king, beginning very young and being in a place of power, a good influence, good instruction, good example, that kind of thing. I think helped Joash a lot. But Hezekiah would be one of those kings that would be considered to be a good king. The word or the name Hezekiah actually means the might or the strength of the Lord. Some say Jehovah, but the idea is the same, I think, that he is described as being the might or the strength of Jehovah. He is the son of Ahaz, the 11th king of Judah, and he is he is the offspring of a wicked king, one who took the sacred things from the temple and made sacrifices to idols and was in every way a very wicked man. So I think that makes it even more interesting that you would have one with that kind of influence and that kind of predecessor who would then be able to make such great changes and great leaps toward God in his life. Second Chronicles 28 and 29 record um, Ahaz's downfall. There are several references to the significance, the important parts of Hezekiah's life, and those begin in 2 Kings 18. They're also in 2 Chronicles 29. When you put all of those together, you put those verses together, actually 18, 1 through 3, and then 2 Chronicles 29, 1 and 2, you find that Hezekiah was 25 years old when he began to reign. He reigned for 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother was Abijah. He did what was right in the sight of the Lord, like his father David had done. By the way, that's an interesting phrase. If you look at that last phrase, like his father David has done, that's used a few times concerning those leaders of the Old Testament, kings of Judah. They did what was right, like their father David. An interesting phrase that we could spend a lot of time talking about the significance of that. Remember when we think about Solomon and David turning the kingdom over to Solomon, you remember the one thing that David told Solomon to do and to to make sure that he did was to hold on and to obey the statutes of God. That that's not exactly what Solomon did, but that's what he was told to do. So he's given that moniker, I guess, to Hezekiah, is that he was one who had actually did what was right in the sight of the Lord, as his father David had done. The mother of Hezekiah, Abijah, must have had some counteracting influence. At least my common sense tells me that somebody had some positive input and some positive influence there, and it surely wasn't his father. So maybe it was his mother who is mentioned and is a part of his life, obviously, and maybe it is her influence that had some kind of impact on the life of Hezekiah and the good turning of Hezekiah in that direction. So one of the things that we learn from those first few passages that I mentioned from 2 Kings 18 and 2 Chronicles 29 is that he was one who was a good king. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord according to what his father David had done. All right, any observations before we move on into some reading of the text? All right, let's look at 2 Kings 18. Let's read 1 through 3 and give us some reminder of what I've just mentioned. When you put all of those passages together, you find some details about the reign of Hezekiah. In the 3rd year of Hoshea, son of Elah, king of Israel, Hezekiah, the son of Ahaz, king of Judah, began to reign. He was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Abi, the daughter of Zechariah. She's also called Abijah, the daughter of Zechariah, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord according to all his father David had done. Now, if you stop right there, there's quite a lot of information, but as you begin to read further in verses 4 and 5, you see something greatly significant. As a matter of fact, verses 4 through 7 tells us about the significant changes that Hezekiah was going to make. Let me back up to verse 3, because at the end of verse 3 is kind of a preface to what's about to be said, because he says he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord according to what his father David had done. And here's what he did. Here's what he's described, verse 4. He removed the high places and broke the pillars and cut down the Asherah, and he broke in pieces the bronze serpent that Moses had made, for until those days the people of Israel had made offerings to it. It was called Nehushtan. He trusted the Lord and the God of Israel, so that there were none like him among all the kings of Judah after him, nor among those who were before him. For he held fast to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but kept the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses. And the Lord was with him. Wherever he went out, he prospered. He rebelled against the kings of Assyria and would not serve him. He struck down the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory, from watchtower to fortified city. So that's through verse 8, actually. But notice this beginning of what would be a revival for the nation of Israel, because his father had led them down that path that was a path of destruction. It was a path of Asherah, worshiping of false gods, Baal, all of that would be in opposition to what God wanted his nation, his people to be. And so Hezekiah had witnessed this pulling down of the nation and drawing the nation away after false gods. And so the first thing that we read about Hezekiah is that he begins this revival of the Lord God, the revival of worshiping the God of Israel. Notice it refers to him a couple of different ways when it says 18, 4, he removed the Asherah, broke it into pieces. He trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. He trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. Jehovah is one of those ways it probably is translated, but the idea is still very clear, isn't it? That Hezekiah conducted this revival by repairing, cleansing the temple. Actually, if you go to 2 Chronicles, it actually refers to the fact that he cleansed the temple, repaired the temple, did what was necessary there to make worship available again and make it something that could be done again there in the temple. So Hezekiah leads in this revival, removed the high places. He prepared for and established the Passover and other things. 2 Chronicles 30. Let's just go there. We're really close, so let's go to 2 Chronicles 30. And since we're there, we'll go back and pick up 29. Notice 29:3. This is 2 Chronicles 29:3. In the first year of his reign, in the first month, he opened the doors of the house of the Lord and repaired them. He brought in the priests and the Levites and assembled them in the square on the east and said to them, "Hear me, Levites, now consecrate yourselves and consecrate the house of the Lord, the God of your fathers, and carry out the filth from the holy place." Now that's reading through verse 5, but that gives you a good idea of the direction that Hezekiah has started immediately upon his becoming king. Now look at chapter 30, verse 1 and following. Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Judah and wrote letters also to Ephraim and Manasseh that they should come to the house of the Lord at Jerusalem to keep the Passover to the Lord, the God of Israel. Or the favorite phrase there, isn't it? The Lord, the God of Israel. Okay? So for them to take the Passover, to keep the Passover to the Lord, the God of Israel, for the king and his princes and all the assembly in Jerusalem had taken counsel to keep the Passover in the second month. Skipping down to verse 5. So they decreed to make a proclamation throughout all Israel from Beersheba to Dan that the people should come and keep the Passover to the Lord, the God of Israel, at Jerusalem, for they had not kept it as often as prescribed. Okay, so you have 2 Chronicles 29 providing us information about the restoration of the temple and the significance of the restoration and the repair and getting it ready, but also gives us insight into the gathering of the priests and Levites, and he told them to consecrate themselves, which would include what? What would it include to consecrate yourself? Yeah, cleansing themselves. The idea of consecrating would be cleanse yourselves. There's the need to, whatever it was going to take, that sacrifices, repentance, we'd call it, confession, we would call it. It's going to be a full return to the Lord. There's none of this like what's been going on up to this time. So he kind of cleans all of that up, and he says, you're going to clean it up, and we're going to return to the worship of the Lord, the God of Israel, the way it was before Ahaz. All right, now any observations or anything that comes to your mind as we think about what Hezekiah does as he conducts this revival in Israel to bring the people and the temple and the leaders back to where they need to be? What are your thoughts? One of the things that I find interesting in 2 Chronicles chapter 30 is that Hezekiah invites the people. He invites them to return. He gives opportunity for the nation as a whole to dedicate and rededicate themselves back to the Lord. When's the last time you can remember somebody did that? You remember a time when that's actually happened in the Old Testament? Probably not since Joshua did that. I don't know that there's a time between Joshua and now when actually the people have been called back and given this kind of a ultimatum that it's time for us to get things right. We're in need of getting things right and in place, and he gives them this opportunity to do so. If you hang there in 2 Chronicles 29 and 30, you'll find that there is a restoration of offering. There's a restoration of the word, and as a matter of fact, in one section there in 2 Chronicles 29, it says the people received it with gladness. You have this initiating of the revival by Hezekiah, the tearing down of all of the things that were associated with false worship and these idols, and he calls the people together, calls the Levites together, calls the priests together. Everybody needs to get back where they need to be. It needs to be right, and the people receive that with gladness. Yeah. Uh, I don't know exactly how that might have worked. I don't know how many are still how the numbers would be at this point, but I'm just going to have to take it at face value and assume that as many as could gathered, whether it was a good representation from every tribe or not. But just remember, this is just the southern kingdom. It's not all 12 tribes. So it would be a sampling of the total. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Great point. It's the idea of the Passover being restored was very significant. As Randy points out, as one of those special three. I think the Day of Atonement is going to be one of those that would be special because the nation would then be cleansed, and there would be that great ceremony of the scapegoat and the blood of the lamb being sprinkled on the people for the sins of the people. And so you have that, as well as the Passover. Passover would remind the people of the power of God, the love of God, the strength of God, the relationship they had with God, and how much He still wanted that relationship. So the Passover wasn't just, hey, let's go have a feast. Let's go enjoy a lot of good roast lamb with some herbs and that kind of thing. It was a reminder of who the God is that they were to serve. And when you pull away from God and you are worshiping idols, you don't really care who that God is anymore. You pulled away from Him, and you don't need to be reminded of who He is to make you feel guilty. Who needs to be made to feel guilty after all? Exactly. Yes. Yeah, true. John makes a comment that you would think that once the people see the benefits of being brought back to the Lord, as Hezekiah does, that they would want that, but it doesn't last. And of course, as Randy pointed out, when the king's in charge, He can take you. He can take the nation any way he wants to go, and that's what's happening here. That's what happened to the northern kingdom. That's what's happening here. Hezekiah, the 11th king, and he's one of those that brings it. One of the few that brings them back, and they're just not going to stay back very long, even though they would see the blessings and the benefits of being in relationship with God. They just wouldn't stay. One of the things that's mentioned in those first verses that I read there in chapter 18 of 2 Kings is about how he struck down the Philistines. Verse 8, verse 7, he rebelled against the king of Assyria and would not serve him. Those two things are very, very significant when it comes to Hezekiah taking the reign of the nation, of the people of God, because Hezekiah has seen the way that his father and he obviously has an understanding of how other nations have ruled over Israel, and how they've been bullied and threatened and succumbed to other nations. And that was never the Lord's will. That was never the Lord's will, that they be under the thumb of the Assyrians or the Babylonians, or it was never God's will that they would be under this constant threat and fear, so that they were almost enslaved by someone like the Assyrians, a brutal people that had no real concern for Israel, for sure. So what Hezekiah does is he makes the changes necessary to demonstrate to these nations around them, we're going to serve the Lord our God. He's going to give us the strength we need to be victorious and to stand against you. We're not going to allow ourselves to be bullied and beat into submission any longer. It's not going to happen. Look at verse 13. Yeah. They always are, aren't they, Maury? The reform just doesn't last. Yes. Yep. Very good observation. Right. Right. Yeah, it's quite an observation of human nature, I guess, isn't it? So look at 18. We'll begin in verse 13. 18:13. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. And Hezekiah, king of Judah, sent to the king of Assyria at Lachish, saying, I have done wrong. Withdraw from me. Whatever you impose on me, I will bear. And the king of Assyria acquired Hezekiah, king of Judah, 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. Hezekiah gave him all the silver that was found in the house of the Lord, the treasures of the king's house. At that time, Hezekiah stripped the gold from the doors of the temple, from the doorpost that Hezekiah, king of Judah, had overlaid, and gave to the king of Assyria. Skipping on down. Verse 22. But if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed, saying to Judah and to Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar in Jerusalem? Come now, make a wager with my master, the king of Assyria. I'll give you 2,000 horses, if you're able on your part to set riders on them. How then can you repulse a single captain among the least of my master's servants, when you trust in Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? Moreover, it is without the Lord that I have come up against this place to destroy it. The Lord said to me, go up against the land and destroy it. Then Eliakim, the son of Hildah, and Shibnah and Joah said to Rabshakeh, please speak to your servants in Aramaic, for we understand it. Do not speak to us in the language of Judah within the hearing of the people who are on the wall. But the Rabshakeh Rabshakeh said to them, Has my master sent me to speak these words to your master and to you, and not to the men sitting on the wall, who are doomed with you to eat their own dung and to drink their own urine? Then the Rabshakeh stood and called out in a loud voice in the language of Judah, Hear the word of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus says the king, Do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you out of my hand. Do not let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord by saying, The Lord will surely deliver us, and this city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria, Make your peace with me and come out to me, then each one of you will eat of his own vine, and each one his own fig tree, and each one of you will drink the water of his own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, and a land of grain and wine and bread and vineyards, a land of olive trees and honey, that you may live and not die. And do not listen to Hezekiah when he misleads you by saying, The Lord will deliver us. Now notice verse 36. But the people were silent and answered him not a word, for the king's command was, Do not answer him. Then Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household of Shebna the secretary, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder, came to Hezekiah with his clothes torn and told him the words of Rabshakeh. Isaiah then, the prophet, reassures Hezekiah, and then we'll get to how the king, the general, defies the Lord, chapter 19, verse 8, and 14 and following is Hezekiah's prayer. So 19:14. Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it. Hezekiah went up to the house of the Lord and spread it before the Lord, and Hezekiah prayed before the Lord and said, O Lord God of Israel, who is enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see, and hear the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste the nations and their lands, and have cast the gods into the fire. For they were not gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they were destroyed. So now, O Lord God, Lord our God, save us, please, from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, O Lord, are God alone. Now, I read all of that because, just in summary, one of the things that's happening here is there is this great threat, there's this great, powerful army that is poised to just totally destroy and take captive and take away the nation of Israel if they do not submit to them. What's Hezekiah's attitude about that? Is he going to surrender? No, he's not going to surrender. As a matter of fact, in this prayer to the Lord, he asks for one thing, and what is that? Yeah, deliverance. Deliver us. And how does he... The fact that he emphasizes one thing about the Lord, the God of Israel, is significant because when he asks for deliverance, it's obvious that Hezekiah has faith in God's ability to do that, because he describes him in this way. Assyria is powerful. He doesn't deny that, does he? Assyria has laid waste nations, but you're more powerful. Assyria has done this. Look what they've done. Look how they put fear in the hearts of men. But you, O God, are greater. So the confidence is clear. So now, O Lord our God, save us, please, from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you, O Lord, are God alone. Not a selfish prayer, not one of fear that would say, I'm quaking in my boots because of the power of the Assyrians, because this prayer actually demonstrates Hezekiah's faith in the Lord, his confidence in him, and the fact that God is able to deliver them and save them from the hands of the Assyrians. Then you have Isaiah who's going to prophesy the downfall of the Assyrians. That's in verse 20 and following. And then when you get on to the end of the chapter, you see um, the end of that matter. The Assyrians are no longer going to be that threat that they once were. Okay, what kind of observations? Just we covered a lot of territory. It kind of is easy to summarize, but what are your observations? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because one of the things that I thought of in this whole process is there had to be some opposition, though we don't read a lot about that. But don't you know that there were some out there who were profiting greatly from the worship of idols and who didn't want to see that change? And so when Hezekiah comes to the throne, it seems pretty certain that there was some kind of rebellion, some kind of I don't want this change. We don't want it to go that direction. So as Barry points out, he had some real strength and faith in God to become king and begin to make these changes so quickly and so boldly and drastically to make these changes and to face the great Assyrians with not much more than your faith in God. That's pretty much it. Yeah, that's fascinating to me. Yeah,
They're worshiping that.
yeah,
And yet, if for him to destroy that, it's like you destroyed that ancient relic of antiquity.
yes, exactly, exactly.
How can you destroy something so valuable? Or, something.
Yeah,
Even something like that.
we've had that thing for centuries, and you destroyed the serpent.
It's like some of the people want to destroy some of those ancient statues we've got, in this country.
Mm-hmm.
If they were idolatrous statues that have been for years and years ago, then you think, well, no, it's an antique, valuable to us.
Yep, great observation.
I just wonder where this faith came from.
That's a good question. I think his mama had a lot to do with it. It's the only thing I can figure.
We also remember that he had a man of God that he was listening to.
Exactly. Yes.
Isaiah, and these other kings just didn't listen.
Right. The other example we had, I mentioned earlier, is Joash, who had someone that he could listen to and trust. And the same idea here with Nehemiah, Tommy mentioned about being Isaiah.
Maybe he wanted some of the blessings David was saying. It could be a little maybe selfish on his part to want the blessings that David had. He would try to rule like David did, so his God would bless him like he blessed David.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the idea of wanting that, there's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting what David had and the blessings that God gave him. Now, if it moves over into what you're describing there of some selfish motives, then I think we have a different story. But it could be.
Imagine his mama reading the Bible stories of David's life. Because he had David's dad,
Right.
Maybe telling him the stories of David.
Mm-hmm.
This is the king. This is who he came from.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and one of the things that I think is very significant is the oral tradition and oral history through the Jewish nation, and so a lot of it's not written down, and so I can see his mama telling him stories that she's heard about King David that would be, and just think about the number of stories that they would know that we don't have written down, that we don't know about. I mean, we have David and Goliath, and we have all kinds of great stories, but wow, think about what the oral tradition may have been.
When you don't have to read that, you memorize stuff more.
Mm-hmm.
You put it in memory, you remember it, you tell it, so.
Yeah.
There are people all over the world who don't have a Bible, but whenever they get one, they memorize it because they know better than to pass it on. They memorize it.
Right.
We just think, well, we just take it for granted.
Yeah. And that was a big part of the tradition of the Israelites, and I think that was a big part of that when Moses gave them the passage from Deuteronomy, for them to put it on them, to memorize it, to put it in their brain, and so they could recite it to their children when they walked along the way, or when they sat down, or when they rose up, so that was.
In the morning and evening,
Mm-hmm.
you talk to your children about it. You talk to them about it all every day.
Yeah. So
it's not a single once a week.
Right. And it's not like I can do now. I can go to our stack of books and I can pull out Daniel and the Lion's Den and we can open it and read it. We can do Moses and the 10 plagues and we can read it, but they couldn't do that. It was mostly oral.
Well, as far as the kings go, though, they had scribes and they had people that they had annals of what went on during the kings.
Exactly. Yes.
And that was written down. So they actually did have the written word of the king.
Of the king, yeah. So he had the annals of the 10 kings before him.
Right.
No doubt had access to as well.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, and so it would have been in the royal family.
Right.
So
And
they did have books.
he obviously would have read about the bad kings as well as the good ones, and oh yeah, great observation.
You talk in 2 Kings 16 and 19 talks about everything that Ahaz did, and that all those things were written in the annals of the king.
Mm-hmm.
So it was right there for the sake. You really did all that?
Yeah.
The story of Elijah and all that, God before him.
Right. Yeah. Dale brings up in 2 Kings 16 where it talks about all of the things that Ahaz did were written in the annals of the king. So obviously those were available for Hezekiah and all the kings to refer back to and see what happened. Now, whether history was told straightforward or not, I don't know about that. Yeah.
Mentioned earlier, they had twins that set the parameters.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed like first we had to get the priests in line.
Right.
For the people to follow, to do what they set the parameters on the table. They told them not to be like your father. You were stiff neck too.
Mm-hmm.
But don't look at your father. Look at what needs to be done now. If you're in a simple message, it says, return to God.
Mm-hmm.
That's all he told them, return to God.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Yeah, Nelson's words are very relevant. He mentions the fact that when Hezekiah sees the need to straighten things out, he has to begin with the priesthood and Levites, because they've got to be the ones to offer the sacrifices and get things in order and worship and do that. And then he brings the people, and the bottom line is to confess and don't be like your forefathers. Don't look how it was in the past. Let's go do what needs to be done right now. Great observation. Not to follow the tradition. Yeah, it hadn't gone well for you, so don't do it the way you've been doing it. One of the things that Hezekiah is most known for, I think, is probably his illness and his prayer for more time. He is a man of prayer. In 2 Kings 20 begins his illness and his recovery, and Hezekiah asks for more time because of his impending death, it seems. And then you have the death of Hezekiah, 2 Kings 20 and 21, and I think there are a lot of lessons we can learn from Hezekiah, and we've observed a lot of those already so far tonight. I appreciate your comments, I do. Thank you. Time's up.